More than any other state flag, Americans from all over the country may easily identify the Lone Star flag of Texas. The design was adopted by
some of you folks that have just walked in, we have a sign-in sheet over here. And fill out at the table or not.
Watching the clock.
I'm not having to stop in Dallas.
Well, I will on the way back. Yeah.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, this is for this thing. Okay.
How'd you manage yourself?
I need something that people Google me for.
Where you want?
Hey, how's it going, Terry?
Good. How are you? Good. Good.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for making it over, Terry.
Thank you.
they're showing. So y'all, they can see it.
Or when they're showing, you mean like,
Yeah, there's gonna be a well near the. Sharing the screen? That's the one I'm getting.
So they're there. Oh, no, so we're live streaming their PowerPoint.
we get all the technical details worked out
Oh,
here?
yeah. New location, you gotta expect that.
Yeah, yeah. Pretty nice setup though. I like it.
So then,
We're not looking for cameras, just,
no, I know, but we're streaming on our PEG channel.
Oh, okay.
And so, that's why it's.
Right, exactly.
She's the highest bidder.
Even make 100 grand.
We try to, I tried on Tuesday, I mean, it's a discussion conversation, so it's not, it's gonna catch everything, but, we are live streaming on the channel, so.
Hi, Mom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So, but between, yeah, so right now I switched it to, the people at home can only see the
that.
screen.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. And so then when I am ready to
Yeah, you're
hit
fine.
PowerPoint,
Yeah,
then I can just.
you're the same, yeah.
Okay, folks, it's 2 o'clock. I call the meeting to order. I'm John Hoyt, and thanks you all for coming. I'm a community advisory group. First, all I'm going to do, do a little roll call here. I'm here from Alamo Area Council of Governments. school district? None?
Not yet, John. Still working on it.
Thank you. How about San Antonio Metropolitan Health District? A quick comment about that is, the community advisory group was began in 2007, and the Metropolitan Health District's representative on that group was Kyle Cunningham. And we learned at our last meeting in December that she had passed away. I just wondered, Kyle's service for so many years. She passed away about a year ago. Kyle. And they're going to water system, we have Veronica Cantu. Juan Martinez. Simon Payne. Texas Department of Health, State Health Service. Mark Valdez. Our community advisory group. Citizen Ann Sawyer. Marvin Riley. School district leader. Morris. One appointed to the CAG and Eduardo Garcia. David, but I've never heard.
I can look into that, John.
For our support folks from different agencies, we have David Dimmeline from the city of Leon Valley. We have Kevin McNeely. In place of we also have the community involvement coordinator. We have Daniel Montgomery. In the EPA contractors, we have Alex Miller, Gregory Thom, Taylor Deal. No one from Geological Survey involved, as far as I know.
I don't know if they come. We have like Chris Braun and Keith Meekum, kind of are sometimes participate in our monthly meetings, but yeah, they're somewhat involved. But.
We have a forum. Next on our agenda is public comment. And to start out, I want to say that there's a sign-in sheet around here somewhere. And before you leave, or now, if you could, we could just pass that around. If anybody has not signed in on that, we'd appreciate it if you would. For our records. Any public comment? Anyone would like to say? A lot of you are from Dr. Schultz's project.
We're excited to learn about this Superfund.
Thanks so much for coming. On the agenda would be the approval of the minutes from the December 17th, 2025. I had emailed those out. Once again, the minutes, I you can prepare those a few days after our meeting, so my mind's a little bit fresher on who was here. And I used EPA's PowerPoint presentation. Those minutes show up on the EPA website, and then the City of Leon Valley also maintains a related site, I think it's called.
start. Thank you everyone for being here. I am, as John said, I'm Kevin McNeely. I'm the alternate remedial project manager on this site, filling in for Stephen. He's unavailable to travel right now, but we're working together. Go to the stakeholder list. Who has control? We've introduced just about everyone. I want to introduce one other person, our contractor for, through our headquarters on the call, and she'll be presenting. Would you like to say hi?
Yes, hello.
Hallie is working with the EPA and the city site, and she'll go over presentation later. I think that's it. I think everyone else has been introduced, and the agenda. You've done the introductions. I'm gonna let Greg go through the site overview and then do the sections, and then they'll hand it off to Al.
So get into it for the Bandera Road Superfund site. This kind of shows the overall Superfund process and where the site currently sits as far as its status. So at this point, we've worked our way all the way through to the RA phase. So the remedy's been installed and it's operating. We have two remedies, which we'll go through in a little more detail here in a few slides, but basically just showing that we're kind of close to the back end of it. Remedy's in place, we're operating it, and then it'll eventually go to O&M, which is when it will turn over and hopefully site close out and deletion from the NPL. So the site location, the Bandera Road Groundwater Plume Superfund site is here in Leon Valley, in Bayard County. So the site has two source areas that were identified. AOI, which stands for Area of Investigation. So we've got AOI 1 and AOI 2. During the investigation, remedial investigation, there were multiple AOIs that were looked into, and these two were determined to be the source areas that needed to be tested. So AOI 1 is what we call Saving Square. It's a shopping center there off Bandera Road. So that's where that site is at. And then AOI 2 is centered around the former dry cleaners, which is called Pilgrim Cleaners, here just across the street here from City Hall. Other well locations on here are groundwater monitoring wells that we sampled. This just shows some more detail on different buildings that were investigated, some of the well locations, associated AOIs, AOI 1 and 2. So for site background, the site was first identified in 2004, part of the TCQ voluntary cleanup program, later added to the national priorities list by EPA in 2007. John White mentioned the CAG, or the Community Advisory Group, was formed shortly after in 2000. And also that same year, it took some immediate action to protect some of the private residences to public water supply, just to eliminate exposure to contaminated water. There was a health assessment that was completed, and then steps that were taken. So installing indoor air mitigation systems at one of the buildings there at Saving Square, and then also plugging and abandoning private wells that had the potential to lead to contamination of the underlying aquifer, the Edwards Aquifer. 2009. So from 2011 to 2012 is when the remedial investigation and feasibility study, and then another follow-on remedial investigation were performed. As I mentioned, the two source areas that were identified as a result of that, they're both former dry cleaning facilities. AOI 1 is there at Saving Square, and AOI 2 is the former Pilgrim Cleaners here. And then the record of decision was finalized in 2013. As the dry cleaning operations, our primary chemicals of concern, fluorinated solvents. So primarily tetraethyl vinylchloroethylene, or PCE, and then the daughter products as well, TCE, DCE, and vinyl chloride. And so the remedy that was selected to address the contamination, so at the source area properties, there's contamination in the surface and subsurface soil, and then the vadose bedrock, as well as the groundwater. So for the soil and vadose zone, we're implementing soil vapor extraction to treat the contaminants there, and then to address the contaminated groundwater, it's in situ bioremediation, so injecting amendment into the groundwater to treat the chlorinated solvents. And then there's a contingency remedy here for indoor air at building B1, which is to install a membrane sealant if needed. But right now it's seeing how the other remedies perform before taking that next step. So that was the record of decision, and then that rolled into the remedial design in 2016. So as part of the design, they collected more data, so 4 rounds of groundwater sampling, 5 rounds of indoor air sampling, and then some soil gas sampling as well. They also abandoned 8 additional wells with the assistance of the Edwards Aquifer Authority, just to continue to reduce potential opportunities to contaminate groundwater further into the Edwards. And then in November of 2020 is when the final design was completed. So at this point, the remedial action, the remedy's been installed. So for the soil vapor extraction system, those were both installed and completed back in January 2024, and the systems began operating later that same month. One note here, so we've got 2 systems, one at AOI 1, one at AOI 2. The system at AOI 1, we've done some shutdown testing and determined that pulsed operation would be the best way to operate that, and that was started in October of 2025. We'll get into that a little bit more later. And then, we're continuing to do O&M of the systems, coming out to check on them, address alarms, take readings, that kind of thing. And then we're also doing indoor air sampling. So we currently do that on a semi-annual basis, and typically February and September of each year. So this just shows our most recent events. We did collect samples back in February of this year, and we'll go over those results here in a bit. Then for the groundwater remedy, we've done 1 round of injections at both sites. So at AOI 1, those injections were done back in February of 2024, and at AOI 2, they were performed February of the next year. And now in this period after the injections, we're collecting groundwater samples from kind of the immediate area where we injected the amendment to evaluate how the remedy is performing. And we're doing those monitoring events on a semi-annual basis. So at AOI 1, we've had 3 rounds of sampling, and then at AOI 2, we just did our first round of sampling at that site in February of this year. And I think from there, I'll let Taylor go over kind of our more recent groundwater sampling results.
You have that clicker?
Oh, yeah. Here you go. Just click that.
All right, so this table here, I should probably differentiate. So as Greg mentioned, we have like our annual groundwater sampling, which is like a site-wide effort. And then we have our ISB sampling, which is a targeted effort for specifically measuring our ISB performance. And so this table here is for our annual groundwater sampling. The different wells that we sample is in the column on the left. The far right column, that's our most recent sampling event. This was sort of at a unique February where both the annual groundwater and the ISB performance monitoring sampling were all collected during one collective big event in February. So the results that are highlighted, those are the results that exceed the EPA MCL for PCE, which is 5 micrograms per liter. If you look at DW404, the second one on that list, you'll notice that we have an exceedance for the first time since December 2016. DW407, that's gone up a little bit compared to the previous 2. It's a bit in line with what we had in December 2022. For DW414, which we would consider our hottest well at AOI2. That's come down quite a bit. It's the first time we've been in the two-digit range. USGS 42, that would be our what we consider our hottest well at AOI1. That's also come down quite a bit. It was below the level or below the MCL during the previous event, and it's jumped back up a little bit, but in the historical context, it's still come down quite a bit. The one at the very bottom, that MW3 6200, that's a historical well that was not previously a part of our monitoring network. We brought that one in recently. That's why you see all the not applicables before the 2024 event. So in 2024, it was quite a bit, 30.5 over the MCL, and it's gone up even more since February, or in this most recent event. Yeah.
You mentioned 404.
Yeah.
That's the one right over here, isn't it, on AOI 1?
We got it.
Or AOI2, but in the parking lot.
Two, I mean. In the parking lot. Is that, you think, it needs more ISB juice? Is that why that's?
Potentially,
You-
yeah.
Is that your thoughts?
Yeah. So we'll get into sort of like what our recommendations are, but ultimately we're looking to do another sampling event, and based on those results, I think we'll be in a better place to make a recommendation on it. But yeah.
Go back up to the chart.
Yeah.
408. Is that one ruined or what?
It's got an obstruction, but it's one that we think we can clear and be able to resume sampling. So we'll work on getting that cleared with our driller here in the next couple months ahead of the next sampling event. Same with some of those other wells.
415 now is in the same category.
Yeah.
Parking lot damage or what's going on with that?
I could look exactly what our notes said, but yeah, I think it's just some of the wells we have we've had like a rock that's kind of obstructed it, or a metal clip from like our sampling tethers. And then there was one well, I think, where it had a bunch of old tether and diffusion bags and stuff stuck in there. So I think it's things that can be addressed so that we should be able to resume sampling.
Those wells are still usable.
Yeah, I believe so.
What's the history with that MW3 6200? That's an old well.
Yeah, so we early in the presentation when Greg was talking about AOI1 and AOI2, so before the ROD, they were evaluating multiple different areas as multiple different AOIs, and so at one time, I believe there was like upwards to 5, and so eventually they were all, I guess, ruled out to where AOI1 and AOI2, those are considered to be the source areas that were targeted as part of our work. We believe that MW3 6200, I think that was part of the AOI3 investigation, so it's kind of in our area, and so it was readily available for us to bring in rather than drilling a new well.
Is that the old storage unit? Or?
Yeah.
And it's an Austin well, right?
Yeah.
Austin Chalk, yeah.
Seems like maybe Roger probably knows. Was there an Edwards well at that storage unit?
There was one historically, I think, like DW37 or something that was abandoned, I think. Yeah.
An Austin well.
Yeah. But I think that monitoring well 3-6200, like you said, it was installed to investigate the different AOIs, and I think at that point it must have been below, the MCL or something.
So it may have been one that was installed in some of the earlier investigations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Probably before the ROD, yeah.
Do they know what causes these like increases all of a sudden where you get 53 and it wasn't much lower?
Well, for some of these, yeah, we've done some recent injections in some of those wells. So I mean, I guess there's potential that as you inject in that well, it displaces a little bit of it. And then for the daughter products or the breakdown products, we would expect to see those levels increase as we are treating the PCE. But
It's, um, okay, so this map here, this is specifically for PCE. These include the concentrations that we were looking at on the previous figure. This map, this is getting into the daughter products, so trichloroethene, this would be the next in the sequence for daughter products. The only detection that we have at AOI1 is USGS 42. That'll be the case with a majority of the daughter, I think all the daughter products, at least based on our February event. The three that you see highlighted, those would be at least the two to the southeast that would be considered part of our AOI2, 404, 414, and then I think it's DW4. It's kind of a cruel reminder that my eyes aren't what they used to be. 409, yeah. DW 409. So that's a well that we did not have a PCE detection, but we do have TCE at. This map's for Cis12 DCE. We just have that at AOI1 at USGS 42. And for vinyl chloride, again at AOI1, it's only at USGS 42. Especially when you get to the Cis12 DCE and the vinyl chloride, that's what you would expect from the reductive dechlorination process, is seeing those start to rise, while PCE and TCE lower or reduce. And then at AOI2, we have Terracon 1 and 2 with VCE exceedances and at 404. Okay, and so this shifts gears into from our annual groundwater sampling, site-wide sampling, to our targeted ISB, our in situ bioremediation performance sampling. So this is a map of our AOI1. Those dots that you see going around the perimeter, like in a U shape, around that building there. The red, both the red dots and the yellow dots, they're all injection wells. Whether they're used for injection or for sampling, that's when they'll be red versus yellow. So the red dots are injection wells that we use for directly injecting our amendment into, and then the yellow wells are used for actually sampling to gauge the performance for those. So USGS 42, that's the historically hot well. That's closer to the source release. That's in the bottom right corner. As you can see, that's come down quite a bit from baseline. Each of the results that we have on here, the top is their baseline result, and then with each consecutive ISB sampling event, first event, second event, third event, that's the data that you see in those call-out boxes. Going around clockwise, IW06, as you can see, that's a good indication also, just like a USGS 42, of a reductive dechlorination working, starting at 45. Gotta follow along on this. Starting at 45, and then most recently being dry, but coming down to two previous events. IW07, this is where we start to get into what we consider to be some of the challenges presented by doing ISB in a karst aquifer, where you could have two wells that are 15, 20 feet apart, and you can have wildly different results. So IW07, you can see that it's actually going up, where 15 feet over it is markedly coming down, and they're sandwiched between two different wells that we've been injecting into, and so it's something that we're evaluating further with our next sampling, and possibly doing additional injections. Some of these other wells where you see like NS's, like IW09, that well's historically dry. That's another good example of challenges with a karst aquifer, where if we're able to collect a sample at one well and right next to it at another well, if they're constructed the same, same depth intervals, if there's no water to collect it at one well, but there is 15 feet over, it's just kind of another example. And so IW11, that's another one that's been going down, was dry during our third event. 12, 13, and 14 have either been dry, but or not detected, but for the most part have been coming down based on comparison to the baseline. Okay, and so these are trend graphs for some select wells that we've looked at. So specifically USGS 42. You can see this would be something that you would expect for complete reductive dechlorination to be occurring, where PCE starts really high, PCE and the daughter products all come down, and then you start to see sort of a rebound of vinyl chloride and cis-1,2 DCE. IW6, this is all-encompassing sort of decline. This is a case where we have a daughter product that would be higher than both PCE and TCE, with cis-1,2 DCE being the highest beginning before our first injection. And then here's IW7, and so this was the one that's right next to IW6, and this is not what you would expect when you're having complete reductive dechlorination happening. It's sporadic, and when it's not sporadic, if anything, it's increasing, like with PCE and TCE, and you can see the daughter products that should be going up, cis-1,2 DCE and vinyl chloride. Those are actually starting to go down, and so we don't have 2026 data for this one, but this is where it left off in 2025, with it being dry in 26. IW11 was going down, both BC and TCE being the highest. There's another general indication of reductive dechlorination doing okay, maybe with incomplete reductive dechlorination, with BC vinyl chloride trailing off. Okay, so some of our general observations: we've had significant reduction in CVOCs from baseline, particularly at USGS 42 and IW6. Treatment areas that were established, that's likely due to those being areas where our carbon, the available carbon in our amendment, being able to be effectively distributed through the Plume area. The limited effectiveness that we see from our IW8 injection, that would be the well that we inject to right next to IW7, where we would hope to see the results, favorable results at. That would indicate that there's limited effectiveness from what we're doing at IW8. And as is typical for injection remedies, we've seen rebound following depletion of the organic carbon amendment. So the available carbon that's in our amendment when we inject, that can deplete over time, and it's no longer available for like the biological process to keep going. And as we said, several wells were unable to be sampled because they were dry. Again, that's having insufficient water in them. That's another complication of several wells in a small distributed area and showing the effects of a karst aquifer. Our recommended next steps would be to collect another round of ISB performance sampling. John, like I was mentioning to you, then we'll probably determine from there whether we think that we need to do another event or not. What we might propose during the next event is injecting directly into IW7 and 9 as opposed to 8, and then sampling 7 and 9, and then look at performing sampling at other times during the year. We had talked about that earlier with TCQ, looking at, what did we say, not February, May, yeah. May and November, okay. Yeah.
The area's been in a drought for like 5 years, and that's generally around 5 inches of rain.
Yeah.
So May being a wetter month.
May is the wettest, and second is
Keeping the creek over there behind AOI 1, with that heavy rain, there's a lot of Austin chalk exposures there, fractured stuff, and that water doesn't sit there very long. So anyway, after this rain, we just had wells that were dry in February or whatever. They might have water.
Yeah.
sample of mine.
Well, we are all here, so.
Yeah, such a view.
All right.
All right. Well, from the groundwater results, we can move into the indoor air sampling that we perform. So these are the indoor air sampling results. This is just for PCE. And we sample, a number of different buildings kind of around AOI 1 and AOI 2. And then here on the right side column is our most recent results, which we collected back in February of 2026. So we've had some low-level detections at some sample locations there, but mostly non-detect, and no exceedances of the indoor air cleanup goal for PCE, which is 175. So we're well below that. This just shows the sample locations and corresponding results from the most recent event. So building 1 is at the Saving Square site, and building 3 is the vet clinic that's right next door. And so, as you can see, mostly non-detect. These are all PCE results again, but had just a couple low-level detections there at the Saving Square. And then we also sample at the former Pilgrim Cleaners building, and we had all non-detects for PCE over there. And then there's a former doctor's office that's kind of across the street here that's a little bit down El Verde from the former Pilgrim Cleaners building, but we sampled that one as well and had non-detects for PCE there. While we had low-level or non-detects for PCE, we did have some hits for TCE at building 3. So the most recent results, we had one sample location that is a little bit over the rod indoor air cleanup goal, which for TCE is 8.8. So we had a detection of 11 there. The other 2, we had detections, but they were below the cleanup goal. And that's kind of consistent with the past event before that. And so the plan to address that TCE exceedance, there is an existing vapor intrusion mitigation system, basically a fan to help pull vapors from underneath the slab. But it's not currently in operation, so we want to get that back up and going. So hopefully make some progress on that. Yep.
That fence hasn't been operating for a while.
It was a solar powered, or 2 solar powered fans, and it looks like the solar panels are no longer working. So the fans need to be replaced, and then what we propose to do is to tie it into the electrical panel so that the fans run continuously versus, based on the solar power availability.
When do you think that'll be finished or get that back going?
I think there's some things that administratively have to get done so we can get out there and do that, but hopefully in the next couple months. Yeah.
Greg, which of those buildings are occupied currently? Saving Square, I think.
Saving Square is, building 3 is, and then the former Pilgrim Cleaners is now the Royal Tile building. But as far as I know, and maybe David or someone at the city would know, the former doctor's office that's over there, I don't think that building is occupied. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Currently, we're not using it.
Gotcha.
Did anyone take over that former church tenant that was in the no, still, there's one, what would you call it, like a tenant spot that's in building 1. All the other ones are occupied except for one. There was a former church there, but it's been empty for
At least a year.
at least a year.
Yeah. Now we can, oh yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Back at, where it shows, I think it's under the PCE.
Do you want these or do you want the figures? Mm-hmm.
Under, oh yeah, VI 107, building 3. There's 2 results listed there. What is FD? Is that a duplicate?
A field dupe, yeah, so just, yeah, apparentness field, yeah.
Are those Suma canisters? How do y'all do that?
Yeah, we collect Suma canisters, and since it's like a industrial or commercial exposure, we try to collect those samples over an 8-hour period. Yeah, they kind of reflect the workday. Yeah. Now we can get into the two SVE systems. So this is the system over at AOI 1. This just kind of shows the system layout. So both systems are built inside of shipping containers or Connex boxes. And at the AOI 1 site, that system's located in the rear parking lot there. And then we have exterior to the container, we've got some other equipment. We've got a condensate storage tank. We've got the GAC vessels, which are used to treat the discharged air before it's emitted to the atmosphere, and then some other electrical components. And then it shows here as well the subsurface piping that goes from the system out to the individual SVE wells. Same thing here at AOI 2. We've got the system across the street here in a fenced-in area. It's the same layout as AOI 1 as far as the equipment that's involved, just a little bit smaller system. And then you see all these wells here. So the red dots are the shallow SVE wells, and then the two yellow dots, they're actually located on the property where that former doctor's office is. Those are the deeper horizontal wells. And so at AOI 1, these are the shallow wells. These are typically, 6 to 8 feet below the ground. And then where you see the dashed portions of the lines, that's where the screen segments are. So that's where the system is pulling air from. So we've got 3 wells there with each having, 2 to 4 screen segments each. And then at the AOI 2 site, similar layout, 6 to 8 feet below ground. We got 4 different wells with a bunch of individual screen segments there, all kind of pulling air from underneath the building. The 2 deep wells, so each side, the AOI 1 has 2 of the deeper wells. Those are screened further down from 32 to 34 feet, so kind of in that bedrock Vados zone. And then they've just got solid sections of screen there, 120-foot screens. And then pretty much the same over at AOI 2 as well. Same depth, 32 to 34 feet, screened underneath the building. And these are some photos of the completed systems. So this is a SVE system over at AOI 1. So everything's inside a fenced enclosure, and you kind of see the GAC vessels sticking up above the fence there. This is the AOI 2 system across the street, and with the gate open, you can see the equipment that's kind of external to the container. You've got the 2 GAC units, those black vessels, and then the white tank there on the right, that's our condensate storage tank. And here's a look inside the container, so you can just get an idea of the layout. So here on the left-hand side, each one of those wells or each one of those screen segments that you saw before has its own line that comes back to the container so that we can control the flow and vacuum, going to each of those screens. So they all come in individual lines, and then they're manifolded together, and then they go through a moisture separator or knockout tank. So any water vapor that's present in the air that we're pulling in drops out there. And then we also have dilution air. Don't know if that's labeled here, but sometimes we add a little bit of clean air to make sure the blower's working appropriately. And then it comes through the blower package, and then it's discharged outside the container. With a knockout tank, so that'll slowly fill up with water, as we're removing vapor or removing moisture from the air. And once it reaches a certain level, we've got a transfer pump there that'll kick on and pump it to that exterior tank. And then here on the back wall, that's where our control panel is. So that's where we turn on and off equipment or take different readings and things. These are the vapor phase granular activated carbon vessels. So the vapor stream that we're discharging out, it's got the VOCs in it, so we run it through the carbon to absorb those contaminants before it's discharged to the atmosphere. And so we operate these in series, so it goes through one vessel, the lead vessel, and then goes into the second, the lag. And we've got all that valving there so that we can switch the position, change from lead to lag as needed. We collect vapor samples on a monthly basis, and we collect from the influent, so before it's had any carbon treatment, at the midpoint, which is after it's gone through the first vessel, and then the effluent, so after it's gone through both vessels and kind of immediately before it's discharged to the atmosphere. And that's kind of our compliance point. That's where we measure our emissions and make sure that we're within limits. Then our condensate storage tank. It's a double-walled tank so that we're protected, if there's any kind of leak. But we've got a condensate line that comes out through the container from that transfer pump, and that pumps into this exterior tank. And then we've got a drain valve there. So once the tank fills up, we arrange for a company to come out and pump it dry or empty it for us, and then that liquid is hauled off-site for disposal. Let's see, and then some other equipment that's outside. As the blower is moving all that air, it generates a lot of heat. So on the blower discharge, before it goes into the GAC vessels, we have a heat exchanger, so that helps drop the temperature of that vapor stream, and that is needed to improve the efficiency of the GAC and just make sure we don't overheat it. And then there's also a pressure relief valve. Those GAC vessels are only rated for 2 or 3 psi. So just as a fail-safe in case it would get overpressurized, that's kind of a blow-off valve that protects those vessels. So O&M activities that we perform for the SVE systems, we go out typically on a monthly basis to collect readings and perform other maintenance that's needed. And then kind of on an as-needed basis, we address system alarms and empty the surge tank. We collect monthly vapor samples, as I mentioned, from the influent, midpoint, effluent of the GAC vessels to verify that we're within our emission limits and evaluate mass removal. And then we prepare O&M reports, typically on a quarterly basis currently. For the AOI-1 system, we began pulsed operation for that one back in October 2025. Earlier in that year, we did kind of a shutdown test where we shut the system off for a week. And then when we restarted it, we sampled it to see how much concentrations had rebounded after being off. And so what we saw was that at the AOI-1's site, we had reached kind of a steady state, lower concentration. Once we left the system off, those concentrations were a lot higher after we turned it back on. So it just showed that vapors would build up as it was off and then quickly dissipated and returned back to those low levels. So it seemed like the more efficient way to run the system is just to cycle it, so we're still sweeping those same pore spaces and getting the mass removal, but saving energy by not having to run it continuously. So we currently operate it on like a 1 month on, 1 month off basis. This shows the influent concentrations at the AOI-1 system. So we had pretty high concentrations when we started it up initially there in December of 2023. So you can see the PCE result, 186,000. And then, as we've operated over the last 2 years or so, things have declined, and now we're kind of more in the 4,000 to 5,000 range. And PCE is really our primary contaminant. We do have detections of some of those breakdown products, but the concentrations are quite a bit lower. This is just a graphical summary of the PCE concentrations in the influent. So you can see that sharp decline when we first started the system, and then it kind of leveled off for a while. And then that first shutdown test we did was just a week long. We saw the concentration jump up and then quickly dissipated back down to normal levels. So based on that, we recommended starting a pulsed operation, and that started in October of 2025. So we left the system off for a month, and actually a little bit longer as we were doing some other sampling at the time. And when it was restarted in December, the concentration came up to around 12,000. But then within 24 hours, it had dropped back down to below 6,000. So when we turn the system back on each time, we collect samples 1 hour after we start it, and then 24 hours after, just to see, one, how much concentrations have built up or rebounded since it's been off, and then how quickly they're dissipating once the system's running. And then this is the cumulative mass removal. So we've removed around 143 pounds of VOCs, and that's been primarily PCE. So we removed about 109 pounds of PCE. And then for the AOI2 system, we've had lower concentrations here compared to the AOI1 system. It's been a little bit more up and down. We've had some water issues there where some of the wells are producing water, so we have some that kind of are on and off. But you can see, similar to AOI1, PCE is our primary contaminant with quite a bit lower levels of the other daughter products. And we've stabilized now kind of at a lower concentration, below 2,000 for the last couple quarters. And here's the PCE concentrations. You can see a little bit up and down initially, but kind of generally declining. We also did a shutdown test here, but we shut the system off, and when we restarted it a week later, we really didn't see any significant buildup or rebound of concentrations. So this one, it didn't seem to make sense to start pulsed operations, at least not at this point. Then another note here, we did have a water line leak at the building there, and so that caused our system to be shut down for a little bit, and I think we got a non-detect in one of our influent results, which I think was due to that, but as you see, just kind of had stabilized at kind of a lower concentration. So we'll look into opportunities to optimize operations or look towards shutting it down eventually, you know. For the PCE mass removal for this system, it's less than AOI1. We've removed about 49 pounds of VOCs, and of that, it's been about 47 pounds of PCE. You can see the blue line is the mass removal rate in pounds per day for PCE. So it's a little bit up and down, but generally declining. For our system emissions, you know, we haven't had any exceedances of the emission limits. You can see that our emission values are quite a bit lower than the limits that we have, so that's good news. But we check it on a compound specific basis, so we've got a limit for PCE and then a limit for, you know, the total VOCs. But both systems have been well below. And then with that, I think Allie with SKIO was going to provide an overview of the institutional controls.
Awesome, thank you. Because one thing is I can't see the slide deck. Is it possible for me to see that, or I can? Oh, there it is. Perfect. Okay. Can everyone hear me pretty well? How's my volume?
Great.
Okay, awesome. So my name is Allie. I'm with SKIO. We are an EPA headquarters contract working under the Superfund redevelopment program. And we were brought in to provide some additional support with institutional controls. As part of that support, we have been working in the background with the site teams on a technical memo. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, okay. A technical memo, basically looking at the site decision document, what institutional controls were required, what properties were potentially to be impacted by site-related contamination, and ultimately the development of this IC tech memo. So that's been finalized. And now we are kind of in that phase where we're looking at specific institutional control instruments and evaluating their applicability to the site. The next slide, please.
Oh, sorry. You got it.
There we go. So institutional controls, also referred to as ICs for their acronym. So what are ICs and why are they needed at Superfund sites? So institutional controls are used at Superfund sites when there's some contamination remains on a property after cleanup. They can be temporary or permanent restrictions, and they're used to protect people and the environment from exposure to any remaining contamination that might exist either on the surface of a site or beneath the surface of the site. EPA works with property owners and local governments to put these instruments in place, various legal and administrative tools to help protect people in the environment and also to enable properties to be used safely. As I said, these tools are called institutional controls, and they are a very important part of the cleanup process at Superfund sites. So generally speaking, there are 4 categories of institutional controls, and the institutional control implementation and planning is guided by a 2012 EPA institutional control guidance. So these 4 types of ICs are proprietary controls, governmental controls, informational institutional controls, and then a 4th category of enforcement or permit. We're not really going to talk about that in this presentation because it's not being considered at the site. Generally, what we find at Superfund sites is there's a combination of these categories are put in place. Okay, so let's talk about proprietary and governmental. These are the main institutional controls that are being considered and that were required by decision document at the site. So proprietary controls in Texas, these controls include restrictive covenants or deed restrictions that property owners or the state will place in the chain of title in the county land records for individual parcels or properties. So these types of controls we often see used for source properties, properties where contamination originated, generally where contamination is present at the highest concentrations. The next type of IC category is governmental. So governmental control uses the regulatory authority of a governmental entity like a city or a county to restrict certain uses or activities for properties within its jurisdiction. So these types of controls can include things like zoning regulations, development permits, city or county ordinances, or different codes and regulations, building codes, etc. These types of controls are often used for larger Superfund sites and can be really effective for sites with larger contaminated groundwater plumes to basically prevent any exposure to contaminated groundwater through activities such as drilling a well or using that groundwater for domestic purposes. Informational institutional control categories the informational institutional controls can be used usually in combination with the other 2 as a way to provide information to users of the potential for exposure to contaminated material. So these can be recorded notices on a property record, they can be advisories to a local community, health department, recreational users, or any person that's using a property where there may be contamination present. So they don't restrict any activities, but they do provide information to somebody who may need to use the property. Examples of these might be a deed notice, a fishing advisory, informational letters, or potentially using like a 1-call or an 811 digging system. So for Bandera Road, the 2013 Record of Decision did select institutional controls as part of the remedy. And if you've read the Record of Decision or the ROD, you've noticed that it's mentioned several times, but in general, the ROD specifies that ICs in the form of administrative and or legal instruments that will place restrictions on the use or development of land and or groundwater within a defined area. And then the ROD kind of included the larger list that we just talked about as options. So including restrictive covenants, deed notices, ordinance, zoning, etc. So as part of the remedy, ICs are going to be implemented, and these will be based on the type of media that's contaminated. So soil or groundwater, potentially for indoor air, and then the current or projected future land or groundwater use within those areas. So these are the IC options that are currently being considered at the site. So for soil, subsurface soil, or the properties that have like the SVE system or potential for vapor intrusion, We're looking at probably a combination of proprietary controls and informational controls, depending on the property. So these proprietary controls are currently required for source properties, properties where the contamination originated, as well as potentially adjacent properties where there is some of that remedy infrastructure. So the Texas proprietary controls are restrictive covenants, as well as the potential for a deed notice to protect against exposure to contaminated soil or subsurface soil, groundwater, and indoor air, and to protect those remedy components. So the restrictive covenant would get tied to a deed, and it would have activities that are restricted on that property. So if there's an issue with digging for subsurface soil, if there's certain land uses that are not appropriate, like a residential use, that would go in that restrictive covenant that is tied to the deed. For groundwater, we're currently exploring the option of a governmental IC. So this would be an IC through the city of Leon Valley. It would be required for any property where groundwater contamination is present beneath the property or likely to be present based on, groundwater flow conditions and where known contamination is. A city ordinance is being worked on to prohibit or restrict drilling a groundwater well where this contamination is or may be present. So, yeah, there we go. So the great news is that the city of Leon Valley already has a groundwater ordinance in place to restrict drilling of groundwater wells and accessing groundwater. This is the verbiage from the ordinance. So, the exact verbiage here is that drilling permit is required and new water wells are prohibited with the exception of local or state government or for irrigation purposes. So we are in conjunction with EPA and CCEQ and the city of Leon Valley under discussions about the feasibility of amending that ordinance to be protective from contamination from the site. And so that might involve changing some of the wording around what is permitted within a certain area that would encompass the groundwater contamination at the site. So potential next steps that we are currently exploring, mostly continued coordination. So SCIO and EPA have really been kind of hitting the phone pretty hard, talking to stakeholders about the options here. So continuing that coordination with the interagency work group, coordination between EPA and CCEQ, coordination with the city on amending the ordinance, and then potential next steps are discussing with source property owners about voluntarily recording restrictive covenants, as we discussed earlier, to protect against exposure to some of these contamination that remains at depth on these properties. And then ultimately what this all would lead to would be the development of what's called an institutional control implementation and assurance plan, or an ICAP. And this plan really works to document roles and responsibilities around institutional controls for their implementation, for their maintenance, for their long-term monitoring, reporting, and enforcement. And then if conditions support termination, then how that would play out as well. Are there any questions? I know that was kind of a lot and I can't see any of you. And so I hope no one was trying to ask a question. Is there any questions about any of that?
I have one.
Yes.
Hello? So the area that is being considered for the institutional controls, is that area in the technical memo? Or is it the entire city limits, or where is that?
Well, so there's the different kinds of institutional controls. So for those areas where the source properties, so that AOI 1 and AOI 2, those source properties will likely get a parcel specific restriction that would be tied to that, that parcel number specifically. And then the larger groundwater plume would likely be covered by the ordinance that would involve creating a institutional control area, essentially, that would bound kind of the area where the restrictions are needed for the Superfund site.
So the specific boundaries of that really haven't been drawn yet?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. In that, I think you were reading some draft language for the city ordinance. It was like, yeah, right there. That's highlighted in yellow. That's a draft language, is that correct?
That is the existing ordinance.
That's
So
existing,
that
huh?
the city of Leon Valley already has this ordinance, and,
Oh, okay.
and I believe that, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else have questions about what we? I don't see any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. This is a generalized depiction. Thank you. This is a generalized depiction of the groundwater plumes from December 2024. Remember, this is hydrology is governed by secondary porosity through fractures and dissolution pathways. So these are very generalized. They shouldn't be taken as, this is absolutely where the lines were. They're close, and they're probably a lot more jagged in reality. You see it's hard to see, but the red and white wells that say proposed well 1, 2, 3, and 4, those are being planned. We're working on access agreements right now. Proposed well 2 up at AOI 1 up in the northern part. That's to kind of delineate the eastern side of that plume up there. Proposed wells 3 and 4 are to get the western and eastern flanks of the AOI 2 plume, and proposed well 1 is either a sentinel plume if things are going well, or it could be a leading edge plume if the plume has moved farther than we think.
All right. I guess just going over the monitoring activities that we currently perform. So we do groundwater monitoring. So we do an annual event where we collect samples from kind of the site-wide network. So our last event was February of 2026. So tentatively, we'll look at doing another round of sampling in February of next year. For the soil vapor indoor air monitoring, we do monthly sampling of the soil vapor extraction systems to monitor effectiveness and performance of those systems. And then for indoor air, we do that on a semi-annual basis. So our next event there is scheduled for September of this year. Then for the groundwater remedy, the ISB performance monitoring, that's a more focused sampling event kind of in the areas immediately adjacent to where we've injected, just to monitor performance of those injections and inform, additional steps that might be needed. We have the next event tentatively planned for September of 2026 for AOI 1 and 2, but we had some discussions earlier today. We may change that schedule to try to target times of the year when we're more likely to have more water in the wells and have higher success of getting samples. So that'll be something that could happen there. This is just a recap of kind of the upcoming activities. We're going to continue O&M of the 2 SVE systems. Summer of this year is tentatively when EA is looking to install those new monitoring wells, and then shortly after that we'll collect baseline samples from those wells. And then in September is when we have our next semi-annual indoor air sampling event, and then also doing more ISB performance monitoring, though that may shift later, maybe towards November. And then, I guess John wanted to see if there's any other community advisory group updates, or open it up for discussion.
Does anyone have any other questions or comments? The audience? As far as a next community advisory group meeting, I guess probably early December, like we've done before, would be timely, I guess. We'll have more monitoring results to look at. So, and I don't have any other questions on your presentation. Anyone else?
Is there any way to estimate a percentage of how much has been removed of these contaminants, or?
Just like in the groundwater and Vados, or and and, like, between the two remedies, you mean, or just one or the other?
Both or whatever, yeah.
Well, you could take, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, yeah, go ahead.
You could take the mass that they calculated from the CAG, and you could make some you could do some back of the cocktail napkin estimates for the amount removed from the EVO and go to the permeable reactive barriers. And then you could also calculate, and this would be very generalized, and so you could calculate the amount of pore space that you have in the ground and the thickness of the aquifer, concentrations, and just get like an approximation, but.
Nobody's done that at this point, though.
Well, I don't know if anybody's done that specific thing. It was,
I guess it's kind of challenging with determining what the initial mass is, depending on how tightly things are, how many wells we got in the ground, and, not knowing exactly where the contamination resides, as far as it might be in a fracture, that's kind of a small volume, or, whenever you've got like a sand or a gravel aquifer, it's easier to calculate because you know it's just in the pore spaces. But here it's kind of more difficult because we've got these fractures and secondary features.
it would be a lot of gambling.
You want to be a lot more comfortable before you make try to claim like a percentage like that.
But I mean, we could at least, on some of the slides, try to show, what the current concentration is compared to what, the historical peak was, but it's kind of on a point-by-point basis.
But in general, there's a certain amount of this that's gonna be kind of permanent, more than likely, right?
I mean, I guess we're trying to address the mass that's mobile that would present a threat to migrate.
I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, it's some of
That
it.
some of it is gonna be a permanent condition of that area.
No, I don't think it's permanent.
The contaminant, I mean.
No, I mean,
you're
even
restrictions.
if we did nothing, it doesn't break down quickly, but eventually it will, because
Oh, okay.
you would partially dilute and also do naturally. I mean, this stuff is really recalcitrant. It will break down. Eventually, if we did nothing and just walked away from it, 1,000 years, I bet people would be, they wouldn't even know anything happened. I'd be less than that, I'm just saying.
Thank you. Yeah, May in the back.
Y'all mentioned a membrane sealant. Is that like for the wells that y'all are plugged up? And why a membrane versus a regular sealant?
That was for building one, so the Saving Square building. I think it was a remedy that was meant to protect indoor air. So if the groundwater remedy and the soil vapor extraction remedy don't address the contamination that sits underneath, you'll have that potential for vapor intrusion still. So that membrane would just kind of make a barrier to that.
Blocks it versus letting it burp kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But I don't think the membrane is currently in planning. Hopefully we won't need it. It's not current, it's in the ROD, I believe, some mentions of it, but I think things are going well with the SVE in those source areas, and hopefully we won't need to do that.
The indoor air samples are coming up in the building, right? Or lower.
Yeah, pretty low level.
Yeah, so it would be very disruptive to the business if we, since there's no, very, very little or no perceived benefit.
I did have one question. It looked like we already addressed it earlier, but just those spikes and levels whenever it came to the monitoring, it looked like that newest well that y'all put in, the levels were, I think, at 33.1, and then it nearly tripled the next time that y'all monitored it again. Is that sort of an indication that the contaminants are moving through or migrating at all? Because it just seemed pretty substantial that it went from already really high to extremely high.
I guess that's monitoring well 3-6200. So it's not a new well that we put in, but it's a historical well that we just recently kind of restarted
you had like a pipe with water going through it, and you had a bucket of something that like red dye, and you dumped it in it, you'd you'd see the red dye kind of move down. It's the same kind of thing in the groundwater.
Okay.
Especially in these fractured rock systems, like we're dealing with the Austin Chalk. Well, that may intersect some of those fractures, if that, you know, weather events and whatnot, so pulse of groundwater will move on through and push something by.
Okay.
And then you might come back 6 months later and monitor it again, it's way lower, because that pulse went somewhere.
Okay, whenever y'all have difficulty, like trying to do like the daughter, like turn the PCE to the TCE, oh my gosh, the products, yes, when you're trying to make the products, and then there's like a difficulty in the DCE and then the VC sort of forms, is there anything that y'all do to like push that decomposition?
Well, I mean, to drive the whole process, you have to the objective of the amendment is to maintain like a very, very specific like geochemical environment, like in the subsurface. So it's got to be like anaerobic, so DO's got to be low. You know, we measure these things like during sampling. So we have like ORP, which is like oxidation reduction potential. There has to be like a carbon source, like for the microbes to have like fuel to continue the process all the way through. And so like, for us to say like complete reductive dechlorination, that would mean it goes from PCE all the way to vinyl chloride, and then it's like slowly throughout that process, it's like stripping off like chlorine atoms, and then it'll eventually just end in ethene, which is like two carbon atoms. And so I don't think there's anything to really like push it. If it's like all the way to VCE, we just like can't get it all the way there.
Well, it's not, so, so there's a bacteria called D. halicoides. It's a genus of bacteria, and it's one of the very few things that can, well, it might actually be the only one that, this bacteria can take it all the way from PCE down to ethene, which is harmless. Ethene, ethane, and methane. There's some other pathways too, but most of them don't go all the way through. Some of them you might have heard somebody talk about a systole. Like if you have some bacteria, it will break down PCE and TCE and stall at dichloroethene. Dichloroethene typically is called the systole. But when you guys inject it, you guys added bacteria, the D. halicoides bacteria, in order to make sure. It's actually in a lot of the soil already, but it's just, I think it's good practice personally just to inject it no matter what, just to be absolutely certain. Because you don't want to have an accumulation of, do all that and you don't get all the way, done. And sometimes the rate that there's breakdown occurring, like the vinyl chloride sometimes will break down a little bit more slowly. So it'll look like it's accumulating, but it's only because it's being generated from the product above it a little bit faster than it is being degraded, to ethene. So that's something that's very normal. In fact, it's more typical from what I've seen and what I've read that you'll see a spike of vinyl chloride, partway through and before it goes down.
Do y'all do another surge of the microorganisms
Pardon me?
do y'all do another surge of the when there's like that stall, or is it?
Well, so the stall is because the microorganisms don't exist. So these microorganisms are, Taylor was alluding to, or saying that they're anaerobic. They don't like oxygen. Like when you install them, you have like less than 0.5 micrograms per liter, milligrams per liter of oxygen, dissolved oxygen, and you have your ORP is generally, around negative 200, your oxidation reduction potential you're talking about there. And if those conditions are in place, this bacteria basically eats the EVO, which is like, you can kind of think of that, it's a food grade vegetable oil that's emulsified, just like Miracle Whip, essentially, and then they respirate, it breaks off the chlorines off of these molecules, and like PC has 4 chlorines, TC has 3 chlorines, DC 2, and then of course vinyl chloride doesn't fall in that thing, it has 1, and then ethene, ethane, and methane don't have any.
right, well, at this point anyway, we'll be thinking of another CAG meeting in early December. And no other questions, I guess we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Ellie. This would be live stream. Okay. This is gonna post it on your website. That's why they encourage you to use the microphones to pick up the audio, so people at home can tune in. So the fact that you're actually here working. So this is the final one. I can make it a little like a PDF so that I can send it to the city.
So you'll PDF this PowerPoint? I mean, you could probably just replace the PDF.
Looking for gold or what? You want them to know that you're human? Everyone picks it up. Yeah, man. Well, it was, it was the CAG meeting that I did in the presentation that dropped. Now we have people. Well, I appreciate you hearing that. Thank you. I appreciate it. So what's new back at the ranch? CCQ. I was in a meeting, and so I wasn't really aware that I was
Yeah, so it's
But it
like,
was to the west.
yeah, but so it's like, basically saying, I feel like I'm talking about a conversation that we just changed, not the same thing. I remember, I lived, when I was telling you, for us, hurricanes are like real. So it's kind of built every time what's going on.
We do hurricane parties, actually.
Exactly.
You know you're a true tourist if you don't evacuate for the hurricane. Because then they went, and then the hurricane went where they went, so they had to go somewhere else.
It's kind of funny that everybody says this about Kansas doesn't care about tornadoes.
Well, and then I appreciate it. I don't think I went too far. Because it was so hard. I saw something on the double building in the back of
What if a tree fell through each time?